Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we rethink money, ditch the system, and rediscover what it means to truly thrive well. I'm Tricia Miller, mom of 7, financial coach, and founder of ThriveWell. Around here, we believe wealth is more than numbers. It's about freedom, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts. If you're ready to challenge the norm and take back control of your financial life, you're in the right place. Hello, and welcome back to the Bankless by Design podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about a topic that is often mentioned when it comes to whole life insurance and the infinite banking concept, and people call it a scam. Well, I really want to answer the critics today, but in particular, this is nothing new. I'm well aware that Dave Ramsey, as well as some other financial gurus out there, have a propensity to talk about this. They're all about buy term and invest the difference. Whole life is a scam, all of that. And of course, that affects you with the infinite banking concept because we use whole life insurance for the purposes of taking over the banking function in our lives. But recently, I actually received a communication that troubled me a little bit more than usual. And not because this individual was parroting Dave Ramsey and saying that it was a scam, but mostly because he was trying to put forward this idea that it's all about the numbers and that it really has nothing to do with religious beliefs. And this was someone who is coming to me as a fellow Christian and believer. So let me just kind of read a little bit of that communication to you, and then perhaps that will set the stage and the context for everything else that I want to say here today. So I was basically asked the question if I was selling whole life insurance, and I answered honestly, and I said, yes, I do. I sell specially designed whole life insurance for the infinite banking concept. It's the best thing ever to set your family up for legacy planning and taking over the banking function in your life. And I added the comment, I hope Dave Ramsey hasn't duped every Christian out there. Well, apparently that was all I needed to say to spark the response, which was, I can't disagree more. Please do not contact me about this scam. This has nothing to do with religious beliefs. It has everything to do with concrete numbers, and the numbers don't jive. So that is specifically the piece that I want to address today. Now, just so you know, at the end of the day, I did not engage this individual in an argument or try to persuade him in any way. And we did agree to disagree, and that's fine. However, it was something in that response, in that idea that this has nothing to do with religious beliefs. It's all about the numbers. Bigger numbers, better. Well, my concern is that this actually deserves a response because, in part, I think a lot of people think this way. And in particular, it troubles me that believing Christians who claim the name of Christ and care about truth and virtue would also think this way. So if you're a Christian, this episode may particularly be for you, though I would say it really concerns anyone who cares about honesty, truth, and fair dealings. You also should pay attention to this episode. So my focus today is to answer this idea that whole life insurance and the infinite banking concept, as opposed to what Dave Ramsey and his followers typically promote, which is buy term and invest the difference, has nothing to do with religious beliefs whatsoever. It's all about the numbers, and the numbers don't jive. Okay. So let me preface this a little bit further by saying what I'm not saying. I am not saying that you must be a Christian to purchase whole life insurance and take advantage of its benefits. I'm also not saying that you should be a Christian in order to do the infinite banking concept. This is something anyone can do and take advantage of the wonderful benefits of it. But what I am saying is that this is a system of practice and it is not thoroughly neutral. For one thing, the infinite banking concept was discovered by a very serious thinking Christian, R. Nelson Nash. But it's more than that. It's not just because of who founded it. It's actually a system that is undergirded, I believe, with a particular philosophy and a particular economic view, namely Austrian economics. And I believe it is also undergirded by Christian principles and virtues. And that's what I want to focus on today. But I do want to address one of the reasons why I believe whole life insurance gets a bad rap, with these people is specifically because they're looking at whole life insurance as an investment. They want to compare it to an investment. Whole life is bad, buy term and invest the difference. Hear that? That it's a comparison to an investment. Well, from the outset, that is a faulty premise because whole life insurance and the infinite banking concept are not about an investment of any kind, nor can it be compared to one. Whole life insurance itself is about provision and protection primarily, leaving a death benefit for your family, your loved ones. The infinite banking concept is about taking over the banking function in your life. It's this idea that you're going to actually no longer need the third-party banks eventually, and you're going to have a system from which you can conduct your own banking and your own financing throughout your life. So it really has nothing to do with an investment anyways, which is why I guess when they look at the numbers, they think it's a scam because the numbers just don't jive. Okay. I really want to show you how this idea that it is completely neutral is a faulty premise. And instead, I want to explain to you that the infinite banking concept and whole life insurance are actually built on biblical principles and associated with many virtues. So to do this, I want to start by sharing with you the origins of whole life insurance. So did you know that whole life insurance actually has its roots with the church? I didn't know this either. When I first got into life insurance, I had no idea. In fact, I didn't learn this myself until probably about a year ago. But it actually was started by the Presbyterian Synod of Philadelphia. It was started in 1717 as a fund for pious uses. Now, what the Synod did was they saw a need in their congregations to care for their ministers and their families. So they had each congregation within the Synod contribute to a fund that when their ministers would pass away, those funds would be able to use to give financial assistance to the grieving widow and their children. So in 1719, it paid out its first financial assistance to someone in the record books called the widow Wilson. That is all we know. We just know her name. We do know that she was a widow. By the time 1759 came around, they renamed this fund and they did a little more to structure it a little bit more like life insurance. And it was called the Corporation for the Relief of the Poor and Distressed Presbyterian Ministers and of the Poor and Distressed Widows and Children of Presbyterian Ministers. So very specific. You can see that this is for the poor, especially those poor ministers who probably weren't paid very well in that day. And then with life expectancy being probably shorter in the 1700s, it would not be too far-fetched to think that it could very easily be that the remaining wife and children are now destitute unless they have some kind of extended family with a lot of means. So the church stepped up to take care of this problem. They saw it as their responsibility. Now remember, this is at a time when there's no government programs, there was no Social Security, there was no other safety net. Church was doing what they were supposed to do. And frankly, as a fellow Presbyterian, this is a history I can really be proud of. Because here they're doing exactly what they were called upon to do. Think about this for a second. James 1:27. Doesn't this sound familiar? True religion is this, that we care for the widows and the orphans. This is the origin of whole life insurance. Now, let's just continue on with the history for just a little bit. So it had that very long name, was given in 1759. It went on in 1888 to be renamed the Presbyterian Ministers Fund, or shortened to PMF. I think that was a good choice. But by 1990, it went through another name change. And I think these name changes are interesting because it says a lot about what's going on here, what the purposes are, what the background is. In 1990, it was renamed Covenant Life Insurance Company, which then later merged with the Provident Mutual Life Insurance Company. Do you hear all of the Christian terminology in that? And then finally, in 2002, Provident Mutual Life was acquired by the Nationwide Mutual. insurance company, which is still in existence today. But you can see that the purpose behind the origins of whole life insurance was to care for the ministers and their families, and particularly the widows and the orphans. All right. So this is where it gets its start. That sounds pretty scammy, doesn't it? Okay. Let's consider some other principles that I believe are upheld by whole life insurance, or perhaps undergird whole life insurance. Proverbs 13:22 says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And whole life insurance is designed specifically to be able to do this. Whether or not you're independently wealthy, when you participate in a whole life insurance policy and you pay a premium, you will be able to, without any question, leave an inheritance for your children and your children's children. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about this verse in Proverbs, as I began to really think about this, is it actually follows the pattern of a covenantal blessing. Just as God promised to his own children in Deuteronomy 7, verse 9. He says this, "Therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments." Now, do you hear that? God the Father is saying to his own children, I'm going to keep covenant with you and show you grace and love and mercy for 1,000 generations. That's a covenantal blessing. I see that pattern in Proverbs 13:22. It is really a way for a person to emulate God the Father by leaving a blessing to his children's children. I believe we're called to image our Creator. And here we have this happening when we do this. This is why the proverb says a good man does this. We're a good woman, as the case may be, but this is virtuous. This is godly. This is patterning yourself after our Heavenly Father, who leaves blessings for us. Imagine what this says to your family for just a minute, because this isn't just about money. This is about legacy inheritance. Now, whole life insurance, it is money, okay? But hopefully, when we leave a legacy, we leave more than that. But even in the act of leaving an inheritance to our children's children, we have made the statement to future generations, I loved you enough to think of you, to provide for you, to plan, to be very intentional, to leave you something so that you can stand on my shoulders and go even further forward in your life, hopefully being enabled to do well in the world, to do good things in your future. So this is what whole life insurance was designed to do. And I realized this when I first got into this. I was like thinking to myself, I'm a single mom. I'm not going to have a lot to leave for my kids. I had already experienced my parents passing away in poverty and not having anything hardly to even bury them with. And I didn't want to do that with my family. I wanted to be able to do more than that. But I didn't have any hope of becoming independently wealthy to be able to do that. But with whole life insurance, I could pay a premium that I could afford, and I could leave a far greater inheritance to them in the future just with that premium. And so that opened my eyes to the fact that this product actually allows us to follow this proverb and put it into practice, even if we're not independently wealthy. So I think whole life insurance can be said to promote this idea that clearly is virtuous and godly and undergirded by these biblical principles. Okay. Instead, though, let me just say, I see this and it bothers me sometimes. In our culture, we tend to not think this way, do we? We have bumper stickers that say, I'm busy spending my children's inheritance. And I know that's supposed to be funny, and perhaps I shouldn't be quite so serious about it. But somehow, every time I see those bumper stickers, I get a little bit of the ick factor. Like it just kind of, I don't know. It sounds so self-centered to me, I guess. And I think it reveals our selfish attitudes and our thoughtlessness about future generations. And quite frankly, As believers, I think we should be more concerned about the future generations than anyone else. We are to be eternally minded. We are to be thinking about the future and going forward into the future to bless and to cause flourishing. Okay. Let's look at another virtue associated with whole life insurance. And I believe that is stewardship. Now, stewardship, as opposed to speculation, let's contrast those two for a minute. But first, let's define what we mean by stewardship. Stewardship is this idea that we are caring for the wealth of another. Now, from a Christian perspective, and it's probably one of the reasons why we don't use the word stewardship much anymore, is because it comes from this idea that every good gift is from above, that our wealth belongs to the Lord. He has given it to us as a blessing for our use, but ultimately it is His. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. All of the wealth of the world is His, and we have been given our portion to manage and to do with it as wisely and prudently as we can for His glory. Okay. What is that in contrast to this idea of speculation? Speculation, and I literally looked up the definition on Google, and it says investments in stocks, property, or other ventures in the hope of gain, but with the risk of loss. Speculation, in other words, can be just gambling dressed up in fancy clothes. It has this risk associated with it. And I would say that when I'm talking about speculation, this doesn't mean that there's never any risk, but certainly perhaps a more inordinate risk than we should be taking for what would be considered wise management. You're going to have to make those conclusions and use wisdom yourself to determine whether or not what you're doing is speculating. But my concern is that we tend to live in a culture that is a little bit addicted to this speculation. We are constantly chasing the next hot stock tip or which crypto coin can I buy that's going to skyrocket tomorrow. I want to do something to flip a quick profit, make a good buck. And all of that can lead to speculation and be part of that. Of course, we have lotteries and we have gambling casinos. That's clearly speculation. But I believe that even what most people consider to be their life savings is actually put into places that depend on speculation. The market, for example, is quite full of speculation. Now, it's not entirely your fault that you have been kind of conditioned to believe that the only place to grow your money is in the stock market. I think that is actually by design. So to some degree, that's not your fault. But when your eyes are open to that fact, then we might want to rethink our thinking a little bit. But there was a time when we actually had guaranteed pensions. Now, we haven't had this in a long time, but our parents or our grandparents may have had that. They had something called a defined benefit plan. And they knew when they went and worked for this company. Now, granted, we don't work for companies for 40 years anymore, but they knew that they were going to have a guaranteed income for life. Now, isn't that really, in our old age, what we all really need? We need a guaranteed income for life. But instead, we have been kind of forced by the system to become our own pension managers and somehow figure out how to navigate the stock market and all of this and take on all of this risk. We've already seen it. It wasn't that long ago in 2008 when a lot of people had their money in these mutual funds. And unfortunately, if they were on the brink of retirement, they didn't really have time to recoup those losses. It took some years to recoup those losses. And yet here they were, retired or maybe just retired. And now they've actually got to take money out of a fund that has already lost an enormous amount of money. Now they've got to take it out and live on it. And unfortunately, it is a rare individual who is managing to figure out how to do this to where they are actually not outliving the money that they've put into these mutual funds, 401ks, IRAs, and so forth. But whole life insurance isn't like that. It comes with guarantees, not speculation. Whole life insurance actually promotes and even requires good stewardship. So think about this for a minute. As a policy owner, you have to be a good steward because you have to actually pay the premium. But outside of that, the life insurance company must act as a good steward. And I dare to say they have a pretty good track record to prove their stewardship. Just look at that Presbyterian Ministers Fund that lasted for 300 years or so and is still insuring people. And the life insurance companies that I work with and that we use for the infinite banking concept have been around for more than 125 years, and they have paid a dividend every single year, which means that they've been profitable every single year consecutively for that many years, well over 125 years, through world wars, through pandemics, through Great Depressions, you name it. And they have been able to do this because they are prudent stewards of their money. And they have a long time horizon, but they don't put those dollars in the market. They don't speculate with those dollars. They put them in very sound investments, prime investments. Just ask yourself, when was the last time you heard of a life insurance company failing? Now compare that to a bank. When was the last time you heard about banks failing? And then we bail them out. Okay. But we don't call banks a scam. Interesting. All right, let's talk about another virtue that I do believe is associated with whole life insurance and the infinite banking concept. And that is this idea of honesty, integrity, and I might even include loving your neighbor as yourself. Let me explain. First of all, I'll just make this statement. The life insurance companies cannot inflate the currency, but banks can and do. They are part of what is known as the fractional reserve system. You see, banks make money by lending dollars that don't even exist. Today, your local commercial bank can lend $10 for every dollar that is on deposit with them. This means that the bank is creating money out of thin air. And by the way, they didn't work for it. They just created it. They just added digits to your account. But they can charge you interest on those made up dollars, and you have to pay them back with money that you do work for. How does that make you feel? Somehow the injustice of that just absolutely blows my mind, but we let them do it and we just take it as a matter of course. But here's the thing that happens when they do that. They have increased the money supply, and every time the money supply is increased, the dollars in your wallet, the value of them is decreased. So this is the very definition of inflation. It is inflating the money supply. So when you go down to your local bank, you are contributing and you are participating in an inflationary system that is going to make things more expensive for you in the future. And it's robbing from you. It's robbing from you. It's robbing from your neighbor. Unfortunately, we've been brainwashed or given this idea that inflation is a result of the greedy capitalist on the corner who's selling his widgets and he just wants to raise his prices and make more money. Now, I'm not going to say that there's not some cronyism, there's not corporatism and big business and things like that, because that certainly does exist. But at the base level, inflation is an increase in the money supply, which then devalues your dollars. And all you have to do is go to the Federal Reserve's own website and look, and they will show you the value of the dollar from the early 1900s to today has decreased to a value of only 3 cents for every dollar. It's right there on their website. They don't tell you why. They don't tell you that they're the culprit, that the Federal Reserve and this fractional reserve system has been set up to rob you. But it has. It's fraudulent. Okay. We can get into that a whole nother time perhaps. But when you participate with the banking system, you're actually contributing to that. You may not have known that. You may not have done it intentionally. But now that you know it, you have to think about what you're going to do about that. But when we decide to participate in the infinite banking concept and we decide to use a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy to warehouse our wealth, to put our money in there, and then we have a need to borrow to go finance the things that we need in life, we can actually capitalize that system with dollars that we earned. Then we can borrow against that system, borrowing and using the life insurance company's money, and we can go pay for things like buy a car or whatever it is we need to do. And instead of paying the third-party bank back, we can pay ourselves back with interest, recapturing the interest. But here's the other piece that people don't realize. When you borrow from the life insurance company, they have to borrow actual dollars that they have already earned. They cannot lend you more than they possess in their general fund, nor can you borrow more money than what you have in cash value available. So it is an honest system on both sides. And it is a way, I'm going to say it's a financial way to love your neighbor as yourself because you're simply not stealing from them. You're no longer contributing to the problem of inflation that we are all crying about how hard it is to get ahead. So consider the infinite banking concept and whole life insurance. It's one of the virtues. All right. Let me just add to that this truly is at the heart of the infinite banking concept. It's a mission. It is a mission work in order to help free ourselves, free our fellow human beings on the planet from the stranglehold that these third-party banks have on us that are trying to profit from us and to steal from us. That is the mission of the Nelson Nash Institute. So it's hardly neutral, but I think it's a virtuous and good effort for us to participate in. Okay. So when Nelson Nash would make the statement that we need to get the snakes and dragons out of our lives, he wasn't just being cute. Now, when I first started to participate with the Nelson Nash Institute, I sort of thought that. I sort of thought, oh, isn't that quaint? Or maybe he just is referring to the interest that we have to pay banks and they're profiting off of us. No, it goes deeper than that. It is far more serious than that. He's saying that there is an evil lurking behind this banking cartel, the Federal Reserve System, because that is what it is. It is not federal and there are no reserves. It is a private banking cartel that came together and has basically put a stranglehold on the currency of not only our country now, but globally, so that they can profit from it while making us all wage slaves, constantly having to work harder and harder and harder for dollars that are continuously being devalued by the system, while they make incredible profits. This is private system, people. This is not our government. Although I will say, they have gone to bed with the government. They're all in on this together. Wall Street, the politicians, and the banking cartel. And Nelson Nash would say in his book, I think it's in his Building a Warehouse of Wealth, he would say that this book, if you want to learn more, is absolutely a must read. It's The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. Get your hands on a copy of this if you don't believe me and start reading. It is well documented and really will be an eye-opener. And we really do need to wake up to this truth. In fact, let me just read you a few quotes because I think there have been people in the past who have been well aware of this, but we are unfortunately largely ignorant, although I do believe that a lot of people are waking up to this fact. But listen to these quotes. Jim Trotter says, give a man a gun and he can rob a bank. Give a man a bank and he can rob the world. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers, said this, banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. You see, that was one of the big problems in the beginning of our country. There were some who wanted a central bank. There were others who said no. Thomas Jefferson was one of those. They are more dangerous than standing armies. He knew that would be the end of the freedoms in our country. Henry Ford also had this interesting quote. It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Well, we haven't had a revolution yet, but it does tell you something that there is a problem with our banking system. Whole life insurance is a way to take over the banking system in our own lives and to be able to get away from the third-party banks. And essentially, it's a grassroots movement to withdraw from that system. So we're no longer feeding the beast that seeks to devour us. Okay. So the virtue I'm getting at here is that whole life insurance does not have this fraudulent privilege. They cannot inflate the currency. But here's the irony. Despite the fact that whole life insurance has biblical roots that actually came from the church, caring for the orphans and the widows among them, Besides the fact that it offers protection and provision even today, that it offers an incredible stewardship of our money, that it offers us a way to love our neighbor as ourselves by not stealing from them, that it deals with honest weights and measures, honesty in the sense that we both get to earn dollars and borrow from one another and pay back with earned dollars. It is a fair and just system. And I haven't even mentioned that it's based on actuarial science, which means that the premium is determined simply based upon the expenses of the life insurance company, your age, your health, when you're expected to pass away, and how much death benefit you want. Despite the fact that this institution is one of the most stable and dependable institutions, the life insurance companies, that have been around oftentimes for more than 200 years, and certainly more than 100 years, being profitable and being far more dependable than banks, despite all of that, somehow whole life insurance is one of the most misunderstood and maligned financial tools out there. And it's been foisted upon the very church that started it. This is the part that gets me. I've worked on staff in churches. I love the Church of Jesus Christ. It pains me to think that this is misunderstood and so maligned, rather than us recognizing what we could do with whole life insurance to promote the flourishing of our families, of our lives. Listen, money is power. Christian people need to be the ones who have guarantees in their lives that they're going to be able to pass down to the next generation and help the next generation and the ones following after that to flourish, to be able to promote good in the world, to be able to promote the gospel and have the influence that we want to have in the world. And yet we buy into this lie that it's a scam and a fraud. So I couldn't help but speak about this because I think it is so to the contrary. Now, I will admit, where's the problem? There have been some scammy life insurance agents out there who sell you something that you don't need. And there are things out there that I think are products that are very dangerous. The variable universal life, indexed universal life, products that are not whole life and based on guarantees. These become associated with risk. The life insurance companies, in an attempt to compete with the market, have tried to mix life insurance with market rates of return. And whenever you do that, you ruin the life insurance. Stick with life insurance. It is not an investment. Do your investments separate from your life insurance. You can build up your cash values, borrow against that capital, and then go invest however you want to invest. But don't try to mix the two. It ruins both. So that can be part of the confusion, part of the opposition, part of the reason people think that whole life insurance is a scam. And that's unfortunate. But we do have that in every industry. So I'm not sure that that alone is cause for the amount of tirade, for the amount of critique that whole life insurance seems to garner. And I will also say that Nelson Nash, in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker, does say right in the introduction that the life insurance companies have done a horrible job of educating people on the living benefits of whole life insurance, which is that piece of borrowing against the cash values. So no doubt there's a lot of ignorance about whole life insurance and how it works for the average consumer. And of course, then there's the other fact that the government, Wall Street, and the banks, they certainly are not going to educate you about a place where you can warehouse your wealth and receive guaranteed growth outside of a system that they have anything to do with because it's private, where you can borrow your dollars without inflating the dollars, where you can grow your capital tax-free and the government doesn't get their cut, where your heirs can receive that death benefit tax-free and the government doesn't get their cut. And of course, all of that capital then is flowing into the hands of Wall Street, of course, and then they receive the fees and all of that cash flow. They're not going to tell you about it. They're very happy for you to continue placing your dollars in a system that they own and control, that works for them, even while you bear all of the risk and pay all of the fees. So they're not going to tell you about this. So is it any wonder? It's easy for a financial entertainer, not a life insurance agent, by the way, but an entertainer, to foist this kind of lie and deceit upon the public. and in particular, the church. That breaks my heart, and I am coming to you today and saying, please reconsider. Let's look under the hood of this a little bit more carefully. We need to wake up to what's really happening. When we understand what is happening, we will know what to do. All right. I'm going to leave this here for now today. I hope you have seen that contrary to whole life insurance and the infinite banking concept being a scam, that they're actually both undergirded by some pretty strong virtuous and biblical principles. Hardly a scam. I think the real scam is the fraud and deceit that we have bought into about a solid institution founded by the forefathers of our own faith that our grandparents also often used and depended on for their own savings, and it did them well. And yet we've kicked it to the curb in favor of a government program and the shenanigans of Wall Street. It's really the new kid on the block. So let me just conclude with this. I don't believe this is just about the numbers. Bigger numbers are not always better, and it's not an investment anyways. It's a place to warehouse your dollars, and from there, go ahead and do your investing. But do it wisely. Do it with sound management in things that you know and you understand. Okay. Perhaps we will pick up a little more on this topic going forward. At some point, I would like to contrast and compare the virtues or the biblical undergirding of whole life and the infinite banking concept and see how it stacks up against this concept of buy, term, and invest the difference. Not as an investment, but just as a philosophy, as a thought process. Let's see what's undergirding those ideas. Okay. Until next time, have a great week, and thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we're done with the system and we're doing money differently. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and visit us at banklessbydesign.com to learn how you can start living Bankless by Design.